The silent observers. The Galactic Commerce Assembly Station hung in the void like a silver wheel spinning slowly against the backdrop of distant stars. It was a monument to trade and prosperity, a place where 150 different species came together to negotiate deals, establish trade routes, and settle disputes without war. The station was massive, with docking bays that could accommodate everything from tiny scout ships to enormous cargo haulers that stretched for miles. Inside the main assembly chamber, representatives from across the galaxy gathered for the monthly session. The room was designed to accommodate the incredible diversity of galactic life. There were sections filled with water for aquatic species, gravity-adjusted platforms for those from heavy worlds, and temperature-controlled zones for beings who lived in extreme heat or cold. The air itself was carefully filtered and mixed to provide breathable atmosphere for as many species as possible. At the front of the chamber sat the most powerful trading empires in the galaxy. The Xinthian trade lords occupied the central position, their representatives tall and elegant, with crystalline skin that refracted light in mesmerizing patterns. They controlled the most lucrative shipping lanes and had economic influence that stretched across 100 systems. To their left sat the Krell corporate dominion, massive beings that resembled armored insects, their chitinous plates decorated with precious metals that displayed their wealth. On the right were the ancient Voss Commerce Guild, beings of pure energy contained in ornate mechanical bodies, wise and calculating, with commercial contracts that dated back thousands of years. Behind these giants sat dozens of other species, arranged roughly by their economic power and influence. The middle rows held moderately successful trading civilizations, species with decent fleets and established markets. They wore fine clothes and spoke with confidence, secure in their positions, and in the very back, in the smallest seats of the entire chamber, sat the humans. Ambassador Marcus Webb sat with perfect posture, his hands folded calmly on the desk before him. He was a man in his late 50s with gray hair and steady brown eyes that missed nothing. His suit was simple and dark, without the elaborate decorations that other species favored. Next to him sat his team of 5, Dr. Sarah Chen, the economist, Commander James Rodriguez, the security liaison, Arya Okonkwo, the trade specialist, Dr. Yuki Tanaka, the xenobiologist, and young Thomas Parker, the junior attaché who was still learning the complexities of galactic commerce. They had sat in these same seats for 30 years, ever since humanity had been granted membership in the Galactic Commerce Assembly. 30 years of attending every session, listening to every debate, voting on every measure. 30 years of being ignored, dismissed, and forgotten. The session began with the usual formalities. The speaker, an ancient Voss named Coordinator Primus, called the assembly to order with a sound like chiming bells. Various representatives presented reports on trade volumes, piracy incidents, and economic projections. The humans listened carefully, taking notes on their datapads, but they did not speak. They never spoke unless directly addressed, which was rare. High Merchant Zarakth of the Xinthian trade lords rose to address the assembly. He was imposing even by Xinthian standards, nearly 8 feet tall, with crystalline formations growing from his shoulders that caught the light and threw rainbow patterns across the chamber. His voice resonated with natural authority. "Distinguished members of the assembly," he began, "I bring news of an extraordinary discovery. 3 days ago, our survey teams located a derelict resource depot in the Torvin Neutral Zone. This facility is ancient, abandoned for thousands of years, and it contains refined minerals of incredible value. Our initial estimates suggest the depot holds enough rare elements to supply the entire galaxy's manufacturing needs for a decade." Excited murmurs filled the chamber. The discovery of such wealth would shift economic power significantly. Every species began calculating what their share might be worth. Zarakth continued, his crystalline face gleaming with satisfaction. "The depot exists in neutral space, which means it belongs to no one. Therefore, I propose that we, the members of this assembly, divide its resources among ourselves according to a formula based on contribution and capability." A Krell representative stood, its massive form making the platform creak. "The Krell Dominion supports this proposal. We suggest the division be weighted toward those species with the infrastructure to properly utilize such resources. Those with the largest fleets, the most developed industrial bases, and the proven capacity for large-scale operations should receive the largest shares. The Voss representative floated upward, its mechanical body humming. The Guild concurs. Efficiency demands that resources go to those who can make best use of them. We propose a committee to determine the exact distribution formula. The proposal was forming quickly, with the major powers already reaching agreement. In the back row, Ambassador Webb made a note on his datapad. His expression remained neutral, but his team noticed the slight tightening around his eyes. A representative from the Pelthian Merchant League, a moderately successful trading species, stood cautiously. What of the smaller members? Will we receive a share as well? Zarak's smile was condescending. Of course, friend Pelthian. All contributing members will receive appropriate shares based on their capacity and contribution to galactic commerce. The emphasis on contributing members was clear. Several representatives turned to glance at the humans in the back row. A few smiled. Some whispered to their neighbors. A young Krell merchant, emboldened by the attention, stood without being recognized. Perhaps we should clarify what constitutes contribution. Some members attend every session yet accomplish nothing. Some have seats in this chamber yet bring no value to our collective enterprise. Laughter rippled through parts of the assembly. It was not kind laughter. Another voice joined in, this one from a reptilian species called the Scrath. Indeed, I have attended this assembly for 15 years, and I cannot recall a single significant proposal from our human friends in the back. What do they contribute besides their presence? More laughter. Ambassador Webb continued taking notes, his face calm. His team remained still, though young Thomas Parker's jaw clenched slightly. High Merchant Zarak raised a hand for silence, though his own crystalline features seemed amused. Let us not be discourteous to our fellow members. Humanity has been part of this assembly for 3 decades. They have voting rights and all privileges of membership. He paused, his tone shifting to something that sounded almost sympathetic but carried an edge of contempt. However, when we discuss the division of resources of this magnitude, we must be practical. The human merchant fleet consists of, perhaps 200 vessels? Their trade volume is minimal. Their economic infrastructure is limited to a handful of systems. They have made no significant commercial innovations, established no major trade routes, and formed no important partnerships with other species. Zarak turned to look directly at the human delegation. Ambassador Webb, please do not take offense. Your species is young, still learning the complexities of galactic commerce. Perhaps in another century or two, you will have grown enough to participate meaningfully in such matters. For now, I suggest we focus this distribution on species with proven capability. The chamber filled with murmurs of agreement. Several representatives nodded, satisfied that the matter was settled. The humans would be excluded from the division of the depot's wealth, and everyone seemed comfortable with that decision. Ambassador Webb raised his hand slightly, a gesture requesting permission to speak. Coordinator Primus's chiming voice filled the chamber. The chair recognizes Ambassador Webb of Earth. Webb stood slowly. He was not particularly tall or physically imposing, but something in the way he carried himself commanded a certain respect. His voice was quiet, forcing the chamber to fall silent to hear him. Thank you, Coordinator. I have only a brief comment. The assembly waited, expecting protest or pleading. Instead, Webb simply said, We understand the proposal. Humanity will abstain from claiming any share of the depot's resources. We recognize our limitations as a young species still learning galactic commerce. We have no objection to the distribution proceeding among the more established members. Silence fell across the chamber. This was unexpected. Species did not simply give up claims to such wealth. There should be argument, negotiation, compromise. Zarak's crystalline brow furrowed slightly. You accept exclusion without protest? We accept reality, Webb replied calmly. As you noted, our fleet is small, our infrastructure limited. We would not know what to do with such resources. Better they go to those with experience and capability. He paused, then added, We simply ask one thing. And what is that? Zarak asked warily. That we be allowed to continue observing these proceedings. We learn much from watching how galactic commerce functions at the highest levels. Our presence here, quiet though it may be, serves our education. Several representatives exchanged glances. This humility was almost suspicious in its completeness. A Scrath delegate hissed with amusement. The humans wish to remain students in the classroom while we adults conduct business. How quaint. More laughter, but this time it was mixed with confusion. The humans were accepting their inferior position so completely that it felt strange, almost wrong. Webb sat down without another word. His team followed his lead, returning to their note-taking as if nothing significant had occurred. They appeared utterly unconcerned with being excluded from what might be the most valuable resource discovery in a century. The session continued. A committee was formed to survey the depot and calculate exact resource quantities. The division formula was debated, with the major powers arguing over percentages and shares. The humans sat quietly, occasionally whispering to each other in English, a language that few species had bothered to learn. As the session drew to a close, Coordinator Primus announced that the final vote on resource distribution would occur in 1 week, giving time for the survey to be completed and for all members to review the proposed formula. The assembly began to empty, representatives filing out in their various groups. The major species left first, surrounded by aides and assistants. The middle-tier members followed, clustering in groups based on their alliances and trade partnerships. The humans were the last to leave, as always. They gathered their materials methodically, speaking in low voices. One being watched them with unusual interest. Tillith was a young observer from the Aviath species, bird-like creatures with iridescent feathers and keen, intelligent eyes. Tillith had been assigned to study the Assembly's proceedings as part of their diplomatic training. They were supposed to learn how successful species conducted themselves, how power was wielded, and how deals were made. But Tillith had become fascinated by the humans precisely because they seemed to do none of these things. They had no power, made no deals, and conducted themselves with a quiet dignity that seemed out of place in the cutthroat world of galactic commerce. Yet they returned, session after session, year after year, sitting in their back row seats and watching everything. As the human delegation walked past, Tillith noticed something that chilled their feathers. Ambassador Webb was smiling. It was a small smile, barely visible, but it was there. Not the smile of someone humiliated or defeated, the smile of someone who knew something no one else did. Tillith pulled out their personal datapad and began to research. Something was not right about this situation. Something did not fit. That evening, while the rest of the assembly celebrated the upcoming windfall and argued over the details of distribution, Tillith sat in their quarters reviewing decades of trade data. They were looking for patterns, for anything that might explain the strange calm of the human delegation. What they found was impossible. Human merchant ships traveled through some of the most dangerous regions of space. The Kresh Nebula, where pirates had operated freely for 200 years. The Void Lanes, where entire fleets had vanished without a trace. The Broken Star Sector, where 3 different war fleets had clashed just 5 years ago. Yet in 30 years of operation, not a single human cargo vessel had been lost to piracy. Not one. The human colonies scattered across 15 systems had never been raided, never been threatened, never required military intervention from the Assembly's peacekeeping forces. Tillith compared this to other species. The mighty Xinthians lost an average of 30 ships per year to various incidents. The Krell with their massive armored haulers lost 15. Even the ancient Voss, with all their experience and advanced technology, reported regular losses. But the humans, with their small fleet of unremarkable vessels, sailed through the galaxy untouched. Tillith dug deeper, accessing archived security reports. Over the past 30 years, 487 pirate vessels had been reported missing in space. Most of these disappearances occurred along routes that human ships frequently traveled. No wreckage had ever been found. No survivors had ever been recovered. The pirates simply vanished. More data emerged. 12 years ago, the Vrenth warlords had threatened a human agricultural colony, demanding tribute. They sent a war fleet of 20 ships. The fleet entered the human system and was never seen again. The Vrenth claimed equipment failure and never spoke of it again. 8 years ago, the Kesh Slavers, a notorious criminal organization, had attempted to raid a human mining outpost. Their entire operation, 15 ships and 300 slavers, disappeared overnight. No distress signals, no wreckage, nothing. 3 years ago, a Krell corporate Dominion battle group had been sent to intimidate a human trade station, trying to force better terms in a contract negotiation. The battle group, consisting of 5 heavily armed cruisers, reported massive system failures just as they reached the human station. They limped home without firing a shot, and the Krell never tried intimidation tactics with humans again. Tillith's feathers ruffled with anxiety. This was not luck. This was not coincidence. Something was protecting the humans. Something powerful enough to make entire fleets disappear. Something that had operated in complete secrecy for 3 decades. The young Aviath made a decision. They would watch the humans more carefully. They would observe Ambassador Webb and his team, looking for any clue about what they were hiding. Because one thing was absolutely certain. The quiet humans in the back row were not what they appeared to be, and Tillith suspected that the galaxy was about to learn a very uncomfortable truth. The truth beneath the surface. The week passed with increasing tension throughout the Galactic Commerce Assembly Station. The survey teams had returned from the derelict depot with astonishing news. The facility was even more valuable than initially estimated. It contained not just rare minerals but also ancient technology, prototype manufacturing equipment, and data archives that might hold knowledge from a civilization that had vanished millennia ago. The value had jumped from extraordinary to almost incalculable. The major powers were already arguing over the division formula. The Xinthians wanted a larger share based on their superior distribution network. The Krell demanded more due to their industrial capacity. The Voss insisted their ancient wisdom made them best suited to analyze the technology. Smaller species tried to form coalitions hoping to increase their collective bargaining power. Through it all, the humans remained silent. They attended the committee meetings, sitting in their usual positions at the back. They listened, took notes, and said nothing. Ambassador Webb occasionally smiled, that same small, knowing smile that made Tillith increasingly nervous. The young Aviath had spent the week conducting further research and making a disturbing discovery. They had accessed old exploration logs going back to humanity's first contact with the galactic community, 35 years ago. The records showed that humanity's first deep space vessel, a small exploration ship called the Horizon, had traveled to a region known as the Forgotten Reach. The Forgotten Reach was a vast area of space that most species avoided. It was ancient, filled with debris from civilizations long dead, and according to legend, it was home to things that should not be disturbed. No one had explored it thoroughly in thousands of years. The Horizon had spent 3 years in that region. When it finally returned, humanity applied for membership in the Galactic Commerce Assembly. They came with a small fleet, limited resources, and a humble request to participate in galactic trade. The other species, seeing no threat and potential opportunity for exploitation, had granted membership easily. But here was the strange part. In the decades since, no human ship had ever returned to the Forgotten Reach. In fact, human vessels actively avoided it. Even though it would have shortened many of their trade routes significantly, it was as if they had found something there, something important enough to stay away from. Tillith also discovered something else. Ambassador Webb had been on the Horizon. He had been much younger then, a junior officer serving under Captain Elizabeth Morrison. The captain's logs from that mission were sealed under human diplomatic protection, classified at the highest level. What had they found? What had humanity discovered in the Forgotten Reach that had changed everything? The final session of the week arrived. The assembly chamber was packed. Every species had sent their full delegation, and the observer galleries were filled with merchants, corporate representatives, and journalists from across the galaxy. This was history being made, the largest single resource distribution in living memory. High Merchant Zarakth stood at the central podium, his crystalline form gleaming with satisfaction. He held a data crystal that contained the final distribution formula, negotiated and agreed upon by all the major powers. Distinguished members, he began, his voice resonant with triumph. We have reached consensus. The depot's resources will be divided among contributing members based on a weighted formula that considers fleet capacity, industrial infrastructure, trade volume, and historical contribution to galactic commerce. The largest shares will go to the Xinthian trade lords, the Krell Corporate Dominion, and the Voss Commerce Guild, with appropriate portions allocated to all other qualified members. He paused, his gaze sweeping across the chamber. Before we vote, I want to address a question that some have raised. There are members of this assembly who will receive no share of these resources. This is not cruelty or dismissal. It is simply recognition of reality. Species that lack the infrastructure to utilize such resources, that have not demonstrated commercial capability, that have not proven their value to galactic commerce, cannot reasonably expect to benefit from this distribution. His eyes found the human delegation in the back row. I want to commend Ambassador Webb and humanity for their gracious acceptance of this reality. They have shown wisdom in recognizing their limitations, and they serve as an example of proper humility for younger species. Several representatives applauded. The condescension was thick in the air, but it was wrapped in polite language that made it seem almost kind. Coordinator Primus chimed for attention. Before we proceed to the vote, does any member wish to speak? Tillith stood before they could stop themselves. Their voice was small in the vast chamber, but it carried clearly. Coordinator, I request permission to address the assembly. Surprised murmurs filled the room. Observers rarely spoke during formal sessions. Coordinator Primus's mechanical body tilted with curiosity. The chair recognizes Observer Tillith of the Aviath. Please proceed. Tillith's feathers were ruffled with nervousness, but they forced themselves to speak clearly. Distinguished members, I have spent this week researching patterns in galactic commerce, and I have found something disturbing. Something I believe this assembly should consider before proceeding with this vote. Zarakth's crystalline face showed annoyance. Observer, this is highly irregular. What could a junior observer possibly have to contribute to this matter? Data, Tillith replied simply. Uncomfortable data. They activated their data pad, projecting information onto the chamber's main display. In the past 30 years, humanity has operated merchant vessels through some of the most dangerous regions of space. During this time, they have lost exactly 0 ships to piracy, 0 colonies to raids, and required 0 military assistance from the Assembly's peacekeeping forces. The display showed a map of human trade routes overlaid with piracy incident reports. The routes passed directly through danger zones, yet no incidents were marked along them. Compare this, Tillith continued, their voice growing stronger. To other species, the Xinthian trade lords have lost 897 vessels to various incidents over the same period. The Krell have lost 456. The Voss have lost 203. Even the smallest members report regular losses. But the humans? Nothing. A Krell representative growled dismissively. They simply avoid valuable cargo or dangerous situations. Cowardice is not the same as capability. I considered that, Tillith said. But human vessels carry valuable cargo. We have trade records proving this. They transport rare metals, pharmaceuticals, and technology components. They travel through the same regions where other species suffer losses. Yet they are never touched. The display changed to show a different pattern. Furthermore, over the past 30 years, 487 pirate vessels have vanished without a trace. Most of these disappearances occurred in regions where human ships operate. No wreckage has ever been found. No survivors have ever been recovered. The chamber grew quieter. Representatives were leaning forward now, paying attention. Tillith took a breath and continued. 12 years ago, the Vrenth warlord sent a fleet to threaten a human colony. 20 ships. All disappeared. 8 years ago, the Kesh slavers attempted to raid a human outpost. 15 ships and 300 personnel. All vanished. 3 years ago, a Krell battle group experienced catastrophic system failures near a human station. 5 cruisers barely made it home. The Krell representative who had spoken earlier shifted uncomfortably. They remembered that incident. It had been classified, but clearly not secret enough. I am not suggesting anything, Tillith said carefully. I am simply presenting data. Something protects humanity. Something powerful enough to make entire fleets disappear. Something that has operated in absolute secrecy for 3 decades. And we are about to vote to exclude them from the most valuable resource discovery in recent history, without even asking what that something might be. The chamber erupted in confused conversation. Zarakth struck the podium for attention, his crystalline form resonating with authority. This is speculation and coincidence. Observer Tillith, you are suggesting some kind of hidden military power. But we have complete intelligence on human military forces. They have a small defense fleet, nothing more. Then how do you explain the pattern? Tillith challenged, surprising themselves with their boldness. I do not need to explain it, Zarakth replied coldly. Random incidents and pirate incompetence are not evidence of anything significant. Ambassador Webb stood. The chamber fell silent, all eyes turning to the human delegation. "Coordinator," Webb said quietly. "May I speak?" "The chair recognizes Ambassador Webb." Webb walked slowly down the aisle toward the central floor. His footsteps were soft, and he moved with the careful grace of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. When he reached the center of the chamber, he stood for a moment in silence, looking up at the assembled species. "Observer Tillith is correct," he said simply. "There is a pattern. There has always been a pattern. You simply never looked for it because you never saw us as important enough to investigate." Zarakth's crystalline features hardened. "What are you suggesting, Ambassador?" "I am suggesting that High Merchant Zarakth was wrong about several things. We do have valuable cargo. We do travel dangerous routes. We do face threats. But we are never harmed because we are protected." "Protected by whom?" demanded a Scrath representative. "You have no significant military forces." "No," Webb agreed. "We do not. But we have something far more valuable than warships. We have friends." The word hung in the air strangely. Friends. In the cutthroat world of galactic commerce, friendship was not a concept that carried much weight. There were allies of convenience, business partners, treaty obligations, but friendship? Webb turned slowly, his gaze moving across the assembled species. 35 years ago, humanity sent its first deep space exploration vessel into an area you call the Forgotten Reach. We did not know it was forbidden. We did not know the legends. We were simply exploring, curious about what we might find. He paused, and his expression softened with memory. We found something extraordinary. We found a being, ancient and vast, injured and dying from wounds inflicted millennia ago by a species that no longer exists. This being was in terrible pain, and it expected us to either flee or try to capture it for study. The chamber was absolutely silent now. Every eye was fixed on Webb. Instead, we helped. Captain Morrison ordered our medical team to work with the being, to understand its biology, to ease its suffering. We spent 2 years in that region, sharing our resources, our knowledge, our time. We did this even though the being could not pay us, could not offer us anything in return. We did it because it was the right thing to do. Webb's voice grew stronger. The being healed. It told us its name was First Builder, and it was one of the last of a species called the Architects. Ancient beings, vast and powerful, who had built some of the wonders of the galaxy millions of years ago. Most had died in ancient wars or faded into the void. First Builder had been alone for thousands of years, and our kindness moved it deeply. He smiled. First Builder asked if it could meet more humans, learn about our species, our culture, our dreams. We agreed, and a friendship began. First Builder brought others of its kind to meet us. They were curious, gentle, and grateful. They offered to help protect our young civilization as we ventured into the galaxy, not as servants or weapons, but as friends who wanted to repay kindness with kindness. The assembly remained frozen, trying to process this revelation. Webb reached into his pocket and pulled out a small communicator. We kept them secret because we feared how other species might react. We worried you would try to capture them, study them, turn them into weapons. So we asked them to remain hidden while we learned about galactic commerce and politics. They agreed, protecting our ships and colonies from the shadows, never revealing themselves, waiting for the right moment. He looked directly at Zarakth. "High Merchant, you are correct that humanity has limited commercial capability. You are correct that we are young and still learning. But you made one critical mistake. You measured our value only by what you could see, and you never asked what you could not see." Webb lifted the communicator to his lips and spoke in English. "First Builder, I think it is time they knew." The response came immediately, and it did not come from the communicator. It came from everywhere at once. A voice so deep and vast that it resonated through the walls, the floor, the very air they breathed. It was like hearing mountains speak, like listening to the vibration of worlds. "As you wish, Marcus." The lights in the chamber flickered. Alarms began to sound throughout the station. Every sensor and scanner suddenly detected something that had not been there a moment before, except it had been there all along. On the main display, the external cameras showed space around the station. The darkness began to shimmer like heat waves in air. Then the shimmer resolved into something solid, something real, something impossible. A being uncloaked next to the station. It was vast beyond comprehension, larger than the assembly station itself, larger than any ship or structure that galactic civilization had ever built. Its body was organic, covered in what looked like ancient armor plating that had fused with its living tissue over countless millennia. Lights pulsed along its surface, bioluminescent patterns that spoke of intelligence and awareness. It had multiple eyes, each one the size of a small building, and they were looking at the station with gentle curiosity. But it was not alone. More beings uncloaked, surrounding the station in a protective formation, 20 of them, each unique in shape and size, but all sharing that same quality of vast ancient power. They moved with impossible grace for being so large, their bodies shifting in space like living art. The assembly chamber descended into chaos. Representatives were screaming, some fleeing toward exits, others frozen in terror. Security personnel rushed in, weapons drawn but unsure what to do against beings that could swallow their entire station. Only the humans remained calm. Ambassador Webb stood in the center of the chaos, his face peaceful, as the voice of First Builder filled the chamber again. Peace, small ones. We mean no harm. We have been here for 30 years, protecting this station and all who dwell within it. You have been safe because we made you safe. Pirates who threatened you were relocated to distant regions where they could harm no one. War fleets that sought to intimidate you were disabled and sent home. Threats that you never even knew about were turned away by our presence. The voice was gentle, almost sad. We remained hidden because our human friends asked us to, because they feared how you might react. But we grow tired of hiding. We grow tired of hearing you mock the kindest species we have ever encountered, the only species in all our millions of years who helped us without asking for anything in return. Another architect spoke, its voice higher and more musical. Humanity saved First Builder's life when they had no reason to do so. They gave us companionship when we had been alone for millennia. They shared their beauty, their art, their laughter with us. They asked only for friendship and we gave it gladly. First Builder's massive form shifted slightly and the station trembled. You call them weak because their fleet is small. You mock them for sitting quietly in the back. You exclude them from wealth that they have as much right to as anyone here. This disappoints us greatly. High Merchant Zarakth, who had been frozen in shock, finally found his voice. It came out as a whisper. What are you? We are the architects, First Builder replied. We are the beings your ancient ancestors called the World Shapers. We are the ones who built the great stations and impossible structures that you find throughout the galaxy and wonder about. We are old, older than any of your civilizations, and we have seen empires rise and fall like waves on a shore. The ancient being's voice grew firmer. And we tell you now, if you exclude humanity from your councils, if you continue to treat them with contempt, we will leave. We will take our protection with us, and you will discover very quickly just how dangerous this galaxy truly is without us watching over you. The words hung in the air like a judgment. The assembly chamber was silent except for the sound of breathing and the hum of station systems. Ambassador Webb spoke into the terrible quiet. We do not want this to be a threat. The architects are not weapons we wield against you. They are our friends and they act according to their own will. But I will say this, for 30 years you have been safer than you know, safer than you ever imagined, and you owe that safety to beings you never believed existed, who were protecting you because they loved the species who showed them kindness. He looked around the chamber at the frightened, shocked faces. So I ask you now, proceed with your vote. Divide the resources as you planned. Exclude us if you wish, but understand what you are really voting on. You are deciding whether the value of kindness matters in galactic commerce. You are deciding whether friendship has worth. You are deciding what kind of civilization you want to be. Webb walked slowly back to his seat in the back row. His team had not moved through the entire revelation. They sat calmly, waiting as if vast cosmic beings surrounded the station every day. Coordinator Primus, who had remained at their position throughout the chaos, finally spoke. Their mechanical voice was shaken but functional. The assembly must decide how to proceed. This revelation changes everything, does it? Webb asked quietly from the back row. Or does it simply reveal what was always true? That strength comes in many forms, and the quietest among you might be far more powerful than you ever imagined. The Alliance revealed. The Galactic Commerce Assembly Station hung in space, surrounded by 20 vast beings that defied every understanding of what was possible. Inside the main chamber, the representatives sat in stunned silence, their minds trying to process the complete reversal of everything they thought they knew. Tillith, the young Aviath observer, felt vindicated and terrified in equal measure. They had been right about the pattern. Right that something protected the humans, but the reality was far beyond anything they could have imagined. These beings, these architects, had been watching over the galaxy for 30 years without anyone knowing. High Merchant Zarakth slowly sank back into his seat. His crystalline form seemed duller somehow, as if the light had gone out of him. He stared at the display showing the architects surrounding the station, his calculated plans and careful negotiations suddenly meaningless in the face of such power. Coordinator Primus chimed for attention, trying to restore some semblance of order. Ambassador Webb, the Assembly requires more information. You speak of friendship with these beings, but surely there must be terms, agreements, contracts. Nothing in galactic commerce operates on friendship alone. Webb stood again, his expression patient. That is exactly the problem, Coordinator. You assume everything must be transactional. You cannot imagine that someone might help you simply because they care, not because they expect payment. First Builder's massive voice filled the chamber again, gentler now. Let me tell you our story, small one, so you might understand. 3 million years ago, we architects were many. We built wonders across the galaxy, great stations and impossible structures not for ourselves but for the younger species we encountered. We were teachers, guides, and protectors. We asked for nothing in return. It was our purpose, our joy. Another architect spoke, its voice like wind through canyons. Then came the Harvester Wars. A species from beyond this galaxy, beings of pure hunger and destruction, invaded our realm. They saw the wonders we had built and wanted to consume them, to tear them down and use the materials for their own dark purposes. We fought them for 10,000 years. A third architect, smaller but no less ancient, continued the story. We won, but the cost was terrible. Of the 1,000 architects who existed before the war, only 17 survived. We were scattered, wounded, alone. The younger species we had protected forgot us or turned us into legends. We drifted through the void, unable to die but too damaged to truly live. First Builder's voice carried deep emotion. I floated in the darkness for 12,000 years, my body slowly failing from wounds that would not heal. I expected to fade into nothing, forgotten and alone, and I believed I deserved no better. We had failed to protect the galaxy. We had lost everything we had built. The chamber listened in absolute silence, captivated by the ancient tragedy. Then came the humans, First Builder said, and warmth flooded into that vast voice. A tiny ship, barely larger than one of my eyes, discovered me near their young colony world. I expected them to flee or try to capture me for study. I had seen both reactions from younger species before. Instead, their captain, a female named Elizabeth Morrison, spoke to me with kindness. Ambassador Webb closed his eyes, remembering. Captain Morrison was extraordinary. She saw First Builder in pain and could not stand to leave a suffering being alone, no matter how alien or powerful. She ordered the medical team to help, even though it meant staying in unknown space for years, even though we had limited resources, even though we gained nothing from it. They shared their medical knowledge, First Builder continued. They adapted their techniques to my biology. They experimented carefully, always asking permission, always treating me with dignity. Dr. Sarah Chen, who sits in this chamber today, spent 18 months developing treatments that could ease my pain. Commander Rodriguez organized supply runs back to human space to bring materials we needed. They gave everything they had to help a being they had just met. Dr. Chen spoke for the first time, her voice soft. First Builder taught us so much during those years, about the history of the galaxy, about the other species we would meet, about the dangers that lurk in the dark between stars. But more than that, First Builder became our friend. We played music for each other. We shared stories. We laughed together. Laughter, First Builder said, and the word resonated with joy. I had not experienced laughter in 12,000 years. These small, fragile beings, so young in cosmic terms, gave me something I thought I had lost forever. They gave me hope. The architect's massive form shifted and gentle lights pulsed across its ancient armor. When my wounds finally healed, I asked if I might meet more humans, learn about their civilization, their dreams for the future. Captain Morrison agreed, and we began to visit their worlds. I met children who were not afraid of me. I met artists who painted my form with beauty rather than terror. I met philosophers who asked me questions about existence and meaning. I met ordinary people who saw me not as a monster or a tool, but simply as another being worthy of respect. Another architect spoke up. First Builder told us about humanity. We were skeptical. In our long lives, we had seen countless species and most measured value by power and profit. But First Builder insisted we meet them, so we came. And we found that they were exactly as described: kind, curious, generous, and brave. They welcomed us to their worlds. They shared their culture with us. They asked for nothing except friendship. A third architect added, we offered to help protect them as they ventured into the galaxy. We knew the dangers they would face, the predators who would see their kindness as weakness. We wanted to keep them safe, not because they commanded us, but because we had come to love them. The word love hung in the air, strange and powerful. In galactic commerce, love was not a concept that had currency. But here were beings of immense power speaking of love for a species that most considered insignificant. Webb addressed the assembly again. The architects asked us not to reveal their existence. They feared that other species might try to capture them, study them, or turn them into weapons. We agreed to keep them secret while we learned about galactic politics and commerce. For 30 years, they have protected not just us, but all of you. They cleared pirate nests from trade routes. They disabled war fleets before conflicts could escalate. They turned back threats from beyond the galaxy that you never even knew about. First Builder's voice grew more serious. The Void Scourge breaches into this galaxy every few years, seeking to consume life and light. We have turned them back 17 times in the past 3 decades. You never knew they came because we stopped them before they reached your borders. The nightmare swarms that drift through dark space, we redirect them away from inhabited systems. The ancient weapons that activate in forgotten places, we disable them before they can harm anyone. The assembly was beginning to understand the true scope of what had been happening in secret. The galaxy had been far more dangerous than anyone realized. And these ancient beings had been handling the dangers silently, asking for nothing in return. A Voss representative, one of the elders, floated forward. Their mechanical body hummed with agitation. Why? Why protect us when we did not even know you existed? What do you gain from this? Everything, First Builder replied simply. You gave me back my purpose. You reminded me why we architects existed in the first place. We did not build wonders for profit. We did not protect younger species for payment. We did it because it was right, because we could, because seeing life flourish gave us joy. Humanity remembered this truth that I had forgotten. They showed me that kindness still has value in this universe. The architect's massive eye focused on the assembly. You ask what we gain? We gain the satisfaction of knowing that a civilization we care about is safe. We gain the friendship of beings who see us as people rather than tools. We gain purpose in a universe that had become empty and cold. That is worth more than all the rare minerals in this depot you argue over. High Merchant Zarak finally found his voice, though it trembled. Ambassador Webb, we have made a terrible mistake. We measured you by standards that do not capture what truly matters. We saw weakness where there was wisdom. We saw insignificance where there was profound importance. He stood, his crystalline form catching the light. On behalf of the Zynthian trade lords, I apologize. Not just to humanity, but to the architects as well. You have protected us for 3 decades, and we repaid that protection with contempt and mockery. We are ashamed. Other representatives began to stand, offering their own apologies. The Krell, the Skrath, the Pelthians, even species that had remained neutral began to express regret and shame. The cascade of apologies filled the chamber, genuine remorse mixing with fear of what might happen if the architects truly left. Webb raised his hand for silence. We accept your apologies, but apologies alone are not enough. The question before this assembly is not just about the resource depot anymore. The question is about what kind of civilization you want to build. Do you want one based solely on profit and power? Or do you want one where kindness and friendship have value? Coordinator Primus spoke, their mechanical voice steady despite everything. Ambassador Webb, what do you propose? First, Webb said, the resource depot should be divided equally among all members of this assembly. Not based on fleet size or industrial capacity, but equally. Every species receives the same share, from the Zynthians down to the smallest member. This includes us, not because we are powerful, but because we are members with equal standing. Murmurs spread through the chamber, but this time they were thoughtful rather than dismissive. Second, Webb continued, the architects should be formally recognized as sentient beings with full rights under galactic law. They are not resources to be exploited. Not weapons to be controlled, but people deserving of respect and protection. Any species that attempts to harm, capture, or study them against their will should face the full consequences of assault against a sapient being. First Builder's voice resonated with gratitude. Marcus, you do not need to do this for us. Yes, we do, Webb replied firmly. You are our friends. We protect our friends just as you protect us. Third, Webb said, addressing the assembly again. This assembly must establish new standards for membership and participation. Species should be valued not just for their economic power, but for their contributions to galactic society. Innovation, culture, humanitarian aid, peacekeeping, scientific research, all of these should matter as much as trade volume. He paused, letting his words sink in. And finally, we proposed the creation of a new council within the assembly. A council of guardians dedicated to protecting weaker species from exploitation, to responding to humanitarian crises, and to ensuring that all members are treated with dignity regardless of their size or power. The architects have agreed to advise this council, though they will not serve as enforcers. The goal is to build a civilization where everyone is protected, not through force but through collective care and respect. The chamber was silent as representatives considered these proposals. They were radical, challenging the fundamental assumptions of how galactic commerce operated. But they were also undeniably right. Zarakth stood again. The Zynthian trade lords support all of Ambassador Webb's proposals. Furthermore, we volunteer to contribute 20% of our share of the depot resources to fund this Council of Guardians. It is the least we can do to begin making amends, the Krell representative rose. The corporate dominion agrees. We will match the Zynthian contribution. The Voss representative floated upward. The Commerce Guild concurs. We will provide not just resources, but also access to our ancient archives to help guide this new council. We have records of civilizations that succeeded and failed. Let us learn from history. One by one, species stood to voice their support. The proposals passed unanimously, with representatives from the smallest members openly weeping with gratitude. For the first time in galactic history, they would have true protection and equal standing. Coordinator Primus struck the gavel. By unanimous consent, all proposals are adopted. The resource depot will be divided equally among all members. The architects are recognized as sapient beings with full rights. The Council of Guardians is hereby established, and humanity is invited to take a seat on the inner circle of the assembly, joining the 7 species who guide galactic commerce and policy. Webb bowed respectfully. We accept the honor of joining the inner circle, and we pledge to serve with the same quiet dedication we have shown for the past 30 years. We will not seek dominance or special treatment. We will simply work to make this galaxy a better place for all who dwell within it. First Builder's voice filled the chamber one last time. We, the architects, pledge to continue our protection of galactic civilization, not because you command it, not because you pay us, but because our human friends have reminded us of our purpose. We were built to create and protect. We will do so for as long as any of you need us. The ancient being paused, then added gently, but know this. The greatest protection we can offer is not from external threats. It is from yourselves. We can turn away void scourges and nightmare swarms, but we cannot protect you from your own greed, your own cruelty, your own willingness to see others as lesser. That protection must come from within. Our friends have shown you what is possible when you choose kindness over exploitation, friendship over profit. We hope you will learn from their example. The session ended not with the triumph Zarakth had expected, but with something far more valuable. It ended with understanding, with humility, and with hope. In the days that followed, everything changed. The resource depot was divided exactly as Webb had proposed, with every species receiving an equal share. The smallest members of the assembly, who had never expected to benefit from such wealth, used their portions to improve infrastructure, expand education, and develop their economies. The larger species honored their commitments to fund the Council of Guardians, which quickly began organizing relief efforts for regions facing humanitarian crises. The architects remained mostly invisible, but they made occasional public appearances, speaking at cultural events, sharing their ancient knowledge, and reminding everyone that power should serve purpose beyond itself. Young people across the galaxy became fascinated by these ancient beings, and a new philosophy began to emerge, the way of the builders, which emphasized creation over destruction, protection over conquest, and kindness over profit. Teelith, the young Aviath observer who had first noticed the pattern, was offered a position on the Council of Guardians. They accepted, dedicating their life to the principle that quiet wisdom often sees what loud power misses. And the humans, they returned to their seats in the back row of the assembly chamber. They still spoke rarely, still listened carefully, still took notes. But now, when Ambassador Marcus Webb did speak, the entire galaxy fell silent to hear him. Not because they feared the vast beings who protected humanity, but because they had learned to value wisdom over volume, substance over show. High Merchant Zarakth, humbled by the experience, became one of humanity's strongest advocates. He used his considerable influence to promote the new values the architects had championed, and over time, the Zynthian trade lords transformed from ruthless economic powerhouse to a civilization that measured success by the well-being of all trading partners, not just their own profit margins. 5 years after the revelation, the Galactic Commerce Assembly had become something genuinely new. Trade still happened, commerce still flourished, but it operated within a framework of mutual respect and care. Species competed, but they also cooperated. Profit was pursued, but not at the cost of dignity or justice. One evening, Ambassador Webb stood at an observation window on the assembly station, looking out at the stars. Commander Rodriguez joined him, standing in comfortable silence for a moment. "Do you think it will last?" Rodriguez asked quietly. "This new way of doing things?" Webb smiled. "Some species will forget. Some will try to return to the old ways, but enough will remember. Enough will teach their children what really matters. And as long as the architects watch over us, as long as we continue to show that kindness has power, I think we have a chance." In the darkness beyond the window, something vast and ancient shifted in space. First Builder had been listening, as the architect always did when Webb stood at this window. The being's voice resonated quietly, meant only for the two humans. "You changed the galaxy, my friends, not through weapons or wealth, but through a simple choice to help a wounded being you found in the darkness. Never underestimate the power of kindness. It echoes across time and space, changing everything it touches." Webb placed his hand against the window and somehow, impossibly, he felt First Builder's presence on the other side, the ancient being and the small human, connected by friendship that had transformed a galaxy. "Thank you for letting us help you," Webb said softly. "Thank you for being our friend." "Thank you for reminding me why I was built," First Builder replied. "Thank you for showing me that in all the vastness of space and all the millions of years of existence, the most powerful force is not energy or matter. It is the choice to care for another being, to see their suffering and respond with compassion. That is the force that builds civilizations worth protecting." The conversation ended and Webb returned to his quarters. Tomorrow there would be another assembly session. There would be disputes to mediate, proposals to consider, and the endless work of building a better galaxy. The humans would sit in their back row seats, quiet and watchful, contributing when needed and learning always. But now everyone knew the truth. The quiet ones in the back were not weak. They were not insignificant. They were the species that befriended the galaxy's ancient guardians, and they had changed everything by refusing to measure worth by the standards everyone else used. They had proven that sometimes the greatest power is the power you never have to display. That true strength lies not in domination but in friendship. That the most revolutionary act in a galaxy built on exploitation is simple, genuine kindness. And they had shown that those who sit quietly in the back watching and listening and learning might just be the ones who understand the universe best of all. The galaxy had laughed at humanity's silence. But in the end, that silence had been filled with friendship, wisdom, and the protection of beings older than stars. And when the humans finally stood up to be heard, they spoke truths that would echo through galactic civilization for generations to come. The quiet ones had changed everything, not by shouting, but by caring. And the galaxy would never forget the lesson they taught.